What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing the Lost Boys of Ontario. Now, this is just a short video because, as a lot of you know, I have recently moved house and I'm trying to keep up with everything, but I didn't think you guys would mind a little true crime. I write about a ton of missing persons cases, and it's a huge part of my career outside of this channel and outside of Oracle. Every once in a while, though, I do come across a case or a few cases that seem to have some sort of connection that make me feel a certain type of way. Now, while I can't exactly describe the feeling I'm talking about or really name it, I do know it's like a sort of compulsion that comes up in me and forces me almost to bring the case or the cases to your attention, if that makes sense. That's exactly what happened when I heard about the Lost Boys of Ontario. I was totally unfamiliar with the case, and in fact, just like with almost every other video I bring to you guys, I'm researching for the script as I write it. So as I sat down to find something to bring to you guys, I was like, ooh, this sounds interesting. This is absolutely horrific. I'm going to write about this. And then I just start writing the script as I go along reading the information. So let's jump right in, and I really do hope you all enjoy this one. On Saturday, March 16th, 1995, 6 friends went to a party in their hometown of Pickering, Ontario. Their names were as follows: Jay Boyle, Michael Cummins, Robert Rumbold, Daniel Higgins, Jamie Lefebvre, all 17 years old, and Chad Smith, who was 18. No, fortunately, we're not talking about that Chad Smith, our beloved Chad Smith. The kids were just out looking for a good time and kind of doing what young people that age do. It's said that the party was huge and somewhat of a big deal. At around 12:20 in the morning on the 17th, St. Patrick's Day here in America, the boys all left the party together. About an hour later, at 1:50 in the morning, Jay called his girlfriend Monica and informed her that he and the other boys were going to hang out and spend some time nearby at Lake Ontario. Now, Monica immediately thought that this was a bad idea, and she didn't want her boyfriend to go there. She begged him to promise her that he and Robbie, along with Michael, would just come home instead. He promised her, but they never showed up. None of the boys ever returned home, and none of them were ever seen or heard from again. When other loved ones noticed that the boys hadn't returned much later on in the morning, the police were called, and it is said that they immediately started searching for the young men. Some surveillance footage did surface that kind of showed a couple of the boys, or some of the boys, being up to a little bit of no good, getting into a little mischief. It showed 3 of them heading towards the Frenchman's Bay Marina, and they were seen robbing a 4-meter imitation Boston whaler, a 3-wheeled paddle boat, and they also took a case of beer that they had gotten from yet another docked boat that night. Typical teenage stuff, okay? Not mastermind, high quality and quantity criminals here. When I say that night, that means the night of the party, so the night before the footage was viewed and the boys were reported as missing. Some of the residents were questioned, and some of them reported hearing the sound of a motorboat between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning around the arena. After uncovering all of that information, it was initially suspected that the boys had gone for a drunken joyride on the lake and would probably be back at some point. It has been noted that the authorities really didn't take any of the disappearances very seriously, especially after seeing what the boys were up to once they reached the marina. This is very typical in cases with things like this, with young people who are doing, I mean, I'm not excusing, obviously, stealing or theft, but this is, like I said, typical young person stuff. The police kind of saw it as, well, they're bad apples anyway, so they probably got themselves into some sort of trouble. They probably know that they were found out, they're hiding out, you know, those types of things. So they really didn't want to take it much further, despite the family and loved ones of the boys pleading with them to take it more seriously. 2 of the boys, though, were experienced boaters, and it was thought by most people that knew them that they would show up or otherwise be located sometime soon. It came to the police's attention that the boat that they had stolen only had a half a tank of gas in it, and they thought the worst case scenario was that the boys simply ran out of gas or something else very simple had happened while they were out on their drunken joyride. Little did everyone know, this would be the beginning of a mystery that still endures to this day, and if I do say so myself, is a dark spot on the reputation of this area of Canada and its history as well. No shade on y'all Canadians. I love you guys. The police did start taking everything a little bit more seriously, at least, when the boys had not returned back home after a few days, and in that same time, nobody still had seen or heard from them. They launched a massive search effort, which included the Durham and Toronto Police, the Coast Guard, a Hercules C-130 aircraft, and the Canadian Forces base in Trenton volunteered the use of one of their helicopters. Despite this intensive search and the massive effort by the above-mentioned authorities and a ton of volunteers, nothing was found at all that would lead anyone to understand what had happened to these young men. No bodies turned up, no boat wrecks were found, and in fact, an empty gas can that washed up along the shore near Wilson, New York, which no one even knew if it was connected to the disappearance or not, was all that ever turned up from that particular search. They found an empty gas can near Wilson, New York that washed up on shore, and they didn't even know if it was connected. The gas can was believed to have been one that had been being stored on one of the stolen boats. It was once again thought that perhaps the young men had wrecked and hurt themselves, or something worse, during a drunken and ill-thought-out joyride taken on the night of their disappearances. Perhaps everyone thought they capsized and just hadn't been discovered yet. Throughout the many following years, there were numerous sightings of one or all of the boys, but they were never able to be confirmed, and the leads never went anywhere. It wasn't until about 4 years later, in 1998, that any seemingly real leads or information would be brought to the attention of the authorities. Jay Boyle had been wearing a very distinctive pair of red jeans on the night that he disappeared, and a very similar and just as distinctive pair of red jeans washed up near the Niagara River, right near the water intake channel for Sir Adam Beck Hydro Generating Station. While the investigators and loved ones of the boys were initially excited about the find, there was no way, after all the time had passed, to actually prove that the jeans had belonged to Jay, and that lead too went very dead very quickly. It was also thought to be highly unlikely that the body would have drifted that far from where the boys were last known to have been by the lake on what was more than likely the final night of their lives. People were coming to the understanding now that whether the jeans or the gas can or whatever else, whether the sightings were real, whether it belonged to them or not, more than likely they died that night or sometime very soon after. But again, there was no proof one way or the other still. The police and investigators were quite content to just presume the boys had capsized during that drunken joyride taken on a stolen and ill-gotten boat. However, in more recent years, there have been private investigators who have found some very interesting clues and evidence that point to more of a foul play scenario than to accidental deaths. Bruce Ricketts, who is a private investigator based out of Ottawa, Canada, worked on this case in his free time and of his own accord, out of his own pocket, for years. Bruce's organization had quite a bit to say about the initial investigation and how certain things were handled and processed. He boldly proclaimed that any potential evidence there was had been very poorly analyzed and basically tossed to the side without ever having been followed up on, let alone followed all the way through to a conclusion, one way or the other. He basically said that overall the police were incompetent and their investigation lazy, and he even went so far as to suggest that there might have been some sort of cover-up from the very beginning. I'm not saying these things, I'm just saying what Bruce Ricketts said. Allegedly. After all, how could so many skilled investigators from so many different, very well-respected organizations have failed so horribly and miserably at obtaining any answers about what happened to 6 young men? Bruce wrote a book about the disappearances and about the allegedly and potentially botched investigation that followed. It was titled The Lost Boys: What We Know and What We Believe. In summary, it basically says that the Canadian police were too hasty in the conclusions they drew and in simply going on an assumption and nothing more in order to come to that conclusion that they had, with that being that the boys had drunkenly capsized and drowned. I have to say, guys, I do tend to agree here, okay? I feel like the authorities were too caught up in the fact that the boys had been underage drinking, that they were committing these robberies, minor or otherwise, depending on how you see it. essentially making them out to be bad people and therefore a possible considered waste of time to investigate thoroughly and properly. It's like what happens with prostitutes and recovering addicts. That's one thing that pisses me off tremendously, and I really hope that this isn't the case of what happened here, but more than likely, Bruce Ricketts was right, and that's exactly what happened here. He has said of it all, quote, "At this time, based on limited and heavily redacted materials provided by Durham police, we cannot conclude that the boys stole a boat or drowned in the lake. There is no concrete evidence to support that theory. The truth is that we do not know what happened or where, nor do we know the fate of the boys," end quote. This kind of struck me as a little bit weird because it says that they can't conclude that they stole a boat, which they kind of can because they see them on surveillance stealing, I think, 2 boats. But I'm just, don't shoot the messenger. Another thing he said here that I really don't understand is when the authorities redact things so much that they're basically impossible to understand and end up yielding no information to someone new who may be interested in investigating the case. I mean, why would they do that? Why would they do that? They didn't close the case, not officially, but they basically were like, well, probably drown. Meh, good enough. I'm sorry. But in my opinion, when dealing with any cases involving human beings, but young kids or children especially, and remember, 17-year-olds are still kids, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable, and I just have one of my gut feelings that the police were put off and turned off by the so-called drunken behavior of those young people that night, and it just freaking grosses me out and pisses me off. They don't know anything for a fact, and having 5 kids myself between the ages of 23 and 4.5, I cry for these young men's parents. It's sickening, and shame on the authorities in this case. Allegedly. Come for me if you want. I said what I said. Bruce also said that the police were remiss in not stepping in to thoroughly investigate the disappearances right away. Instead, they tried to reassure the boys' loved ones and tell them that the kids would turn up soon and were probably drunk and or stranded somewhere. Basically, they waited several days and kept reassuring everyone without anything to back it up that they were simply off doing drunk hood rat stuff with their friends or something and refused to launch an official search or an official investigation. That means precious time was wasted. Potential evidence and witnesses could have been lost as well. When a kid goes missing, regardless of what the situation is under which they do so, the police should always act as though it is definitely the worst case scenario every single time until the child or children are found. Shouldn't that be police investigation no-brainers 101? He also believes the empty gas can did not and could not have belonged to the stolen boat and said it was impossible for it to have simply drifted as far as it did with the distance from where the boys in the boat were last known to be and where the gas can eventually ended up. He said that if the boys had gone out on the boat on the lake and headed up towards Toronto, then maybe it would have been possible. But he didn't believe it very likely that they had done that in the first place either. Also, the empty gas can was found without a cap, and therefore he thinks it would have sunk had it been in the water for as long as it would have taken for it to have traveled the distance it allegedly did, according to authorities. Bruce brought up another fair point, too, when he reminded the authorities and everyone else that the surveillance footage only showed 3 of the boys, Michael Cummins, Jamie Lefebvre, and Ronald Rumbold, at the marina, and not the other 3 boys. I just want to say I don't know how to pronounce Jamie's last name, so I do apologize. No disrespect meant. In fact, too, those 3 boys that were seen in the footage weren't the only people seen in that footage, and not by a long shot either. There were people all over the place, both before and after the boys were seen and known to have been there. However, the Durham Regional Police Services never mentioned anyone else being seen in the footage in their reports. Why? Wouldn't those other people be potential witnesses, and wouldn't it be imperative to identify and question every single one of them as quickly as humanly possible? Bruce Ricketts said that when he had initially asked Durham police for the footage, he was told it didn't exist. And when he finally did gain access to it, it was heavily redacted, meaning a ton, if not most of the footage was missing altogether. And he only received that much after several attempts at receiving it through what I think is the American or Canadian version of the American FOIA request. He made more than a few requests for access to the footage and all of the case files to access to information and privacy, AITP, in Canada, which I think is our FOIA. That wasn't the only time Bruce had claimed he was met with resistance and uncooperativeness from the original investigating authorities, and he said that the Canadian police were, quote, straight up stonewalling, end quote, him. After looking more into it, he also came to the conclusion that the lack of coordination and communication between the Ontario Provincial Police, the RCMP, and the Toronto Police Marine Unit, he said in his own words, explaining all of the BS he was dealing with throughout simply trying to lend a set of fresh eyes to this seriously disturbing case, where, by the way, the lives of 5 missing minors and 1 18-year-old were hanging in the balance. Quote, the OPP response was that no files exist with respect to this case. That is possible, as we can find no reference to the OPP being asked to support this case. However, we find this rather puzzling, as a 25-mile radius, which is the maximum distance for travel ascribed to the Boston whaler, given the gas volume that was estimated, from Pickering, could have taken the boat outside of the jurisdiction of the DRPS. The RCMP responded with the comment that they searched their records and no files were found. This is odd, in that the potential search area crosses the international border. Again, we can find no record of DRPS requesting assistance from the RCMP. On 1st May 2021, I requested through ATIP copies of communications between TPS and DRPS with respect to the 1995 case. The intent of the request was to fill in the gaps in the investigation by DRPS. The request was refused based on presumed privacy. I appealed the refusal to the Information and Privacy Commission, IPCO, who tried to mediate between me and TPS. The result was negative. However, on 25 January 2022, TPS issued an amended decision letter which amended their first reply citing privacy and instead stated, quote, a thorough and complete search failed to locate any records responsive to your request. End quote. I immediately amended my complaint to IPCO to include the question of TPS's honesty in processing my ATIP, in that they first started a privacy issue and then amended it to say there were no records found. Why the contradiction? End quote. Why the contradiction and all the BS? Indeed, good sir. So what he's saying is they were refusing, this is what I took from that, and I could be wrong, but I believe what he's saying is that they took the estimated amount of gas and how fast this boat could travel, etc. And it was like the jurisdictions weren't communicating with all of the possible jurisdictions, including the fact that it could have went over into the United States, international waters. When he asked for the information to see who was dealing with whom, who was communicating, he was told, quoted privacy. They quoted privacy, presumed privacy for saying why they could not hand the documentation over. Once he got a mediator involved and they realized he wasn't going to back down and he was in the right in order to get those documents, they were then like, oh, the documents don't exist anyway. So forget about that we said privacy, just forget that we said that because we don't even have those documents. Forget presumed privacy. They don't exist. That's shady AF. It's shady. So in my opinion, and guys, this is only my opinion, the police are behaving this way for a few reasons that I can think of. The first reason could be that they're embarrassed by the lack of effort they put forth into the investigation in the first place because they simply wrote the disappearances off, figuring the boys were somewhere sleeping it off, so to speak, and would just turn up randomly sometime soon, and then they wouldn't have to put the work in for no reason. Another reason could be they didn't realize the seriousness of the situation from the beginning and were so sure that the kids would show up that they didn't follow procedures and regular protocols and knew they would possibly face disciplinary action. One more reason I'll give here is something I touched on a little earlier in the video. They decided the boys were criminals and weren't worth the effort. Again, I say, just like all of the many crimes committed against marginalized members of society, they were cast off and discarded as bad. Guys, I'm not even being facetious at this one. come on, man. I thought that Canadians were supposed to be so much nicer and much more considerate than us dirty Americans. Okay, now I'm being facetious. In my opinion, the most outrageous thing that Bruce Ricketts found was a piece of bone that had been found inside of the red jeans that the original investigators and the investigators and entities from that day, the day when the jeans were found, they kept it hidden. They kept that little tidbit a secret for a year. There was a bone found in those red jeans. So technically, they could have been DNA tested, at least eventually, to see if they belonged to the young man who was wearing the red jeans. It would have remained a secret, too, if Bruce hadn't been making so much noise and refusing to let the families continue to suffer with no answers. As for the more official authorities, they seem to be perfectly content to do just that for the rest of their lives. It's gross. It's gross. It's unacceptable. So Boyle, who was the kid who had been wearing similar jeans on the morning they all disappeared, his parents weren't even made privy to that information until 2013. Eventually, after more BS, stonewalling, uncooperativeness, and dealing with authorities who seemed to have a complete lack of interest in having to continue working on this case, Bruce finally uncovered that the reason, or so it said, their reasoning, the authorities, that the bone was never mentioned was because the original box that held that amazing and nowadays possibly and most likely very, very extremely useful evidence had been, quote, misplaced, end quote. It had allegedly been lost or misplaced during a renovation of wherever it was being kept at the time. Finally, the Niagara police relented and sent the piece of bone, after I presume finding it, to the Ontario Coroner's Office for DNA analysis. Finally. And there's no information as to whether or not it was tested against any of the other 5 missing kids, but I'm feeling very safe in assuming that it probably wasn't. I mean, in a way that makes sense, because how likely is it that he's going to switch pants with someone else? But you never know. Why not just... Maybe something happened and someone else did end up wearing those pants. Or what if something happened and for some other unknown reason, one of the other boys' bones were in those red jeans? We might never know, because Bruce Ricketts has had to fight for every single scrap of information and evidence in this case. And that, to me, and in my opinion, is absolutely unacceptable and abhorrent. These authorities are acting as though these boys' lives don't mean anything and that they shouldn't have been where they were or been doing what they were doing in the first place. Crap! At the very least, the families and loved ones of these young men deserve to know what happened. Bruce didn't even believe that the bone didn't match. He didn't, and more than likely just believes it was never tested to begin with. He said he believes it was more that the authorities in charge were incompetent and not really trying to purposely cover anything up, but anything's possible at this point with how everything has been mishandled in this case. Why in the world would you not want to test that evidence? I mean, no, it doesn't tell anyone what happened to them, but at least it'll give some sort of idea rather than just shrugging their shoulders and, like I said, being like, probably drowned. Shouldn't have been in the stolen boat and drunk in the first place. Moving on. It makes me steaming mad, if you guys can't tell. Like, righteously angry, man. They are so worried, or seem to be, how they're going to look when their incompetence and mishandling of this case from the very beginning becomes public knowledge, that they're more than likely suppressing that, and who knows what other evidence, in order to protect their own sorry asses and their own sorry ass reputations. Shame on them, I say it again. Bruce Ricketts continues to investigate this case, but is stonewalled and lied to and misdirected with every single request he puts in for more information. And despite how long he's been involved with the case and with the families, he is not one single bit closer to finding any answers to any of it at all. There's still as much mystery and as little information, at least publicly, as there was the very first day the boys were reported as missing back in March of 1995. God bless and pray for and keep their families and loved ones. And please, guys, love, light, prayers, and peace to all of their families. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out and spending this time with me and each other in the chat, and if you just want to see me smile. Spread the love by sharing this video, and please subscribe if you aren't already, because YouTube is showing me that a lot of people, like 48% who watch my videos regularly, are not subscribed. And they're also showing me that many of you who are subscribed do not have your notification bell clicked to all, okay? So make sure you do that for me. Check out the description box for some important links, how to donate to the channel, PayPal, Cash App. If you become a patron for $20 a month or more, you get a personal intuitive oracle reading from me every single month automatically as a thank you. Now that I'm home, I'm in my office, I'm setting everything up, I'm doing my thing, I'm sitting on top of the world. I am going to start doing a lot more for Patreon, and I'm also going to start the Anytime Oracle very, very soon. So thank you guys for sticking with me, bearing with me, and supporting me through everything I do. Whether I do it well or whether I'm trying to learn how to do it well, you guys are always there and willing to help. And I have to commend you guys for that. And of course, I have to recognize it, right? Also in the description box, you will find links to all 3 of my books, Kindle and paperback versions on Amazon. So that's book number 1, Missing the Fae Theory. Book number 2, Encounters with Evil, 101 True and Terrifying Stories. That's the bestseller. That's the short stories. And book number 3, Shadow Entities, Sleep Paralysis and Beyond, which I really hope that we can get sales up on that one, guys. That is the most recent one that I believe was released in November of 2022. So very recently. If you want a signed copy of any of those books, please email me. Or if you want to get a personal intuitive oracle reading from me, if you want to make a purchase from me, if you want to do a spirituality helping session with me, I don't really know what to call that. But if you talk to the people who have done them, it's 6 weeks worth of phone calls weekly, and I help you work through your spirituality. I help you work through attachments you may have of entities and energy. I help you clear your space, spiritually align. I mean, it's such an amazing course over the period of 6 weeks. For information on any of that, there's a little bit of it in the description box, especially about personal intuitive oracle readings. So hit me up. And for anything else too, at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. For the rest of the month of April, I am doing personal intuitive oracle readings for May for half price, which is $20 a pop. All you have to do is send that money to my PayPal or Cash App, and with the note that says personal or oracle reading or something like that, so that I know that it's not just a random donation and that you actually want a reading for it. On Wednesday nights, you will find myself and Ghost Dragon ZW right here doing live intuitive oracle starting at 7:15 p.m. Eastern, and we just want to hang out with you guys. We love Wednesday night because we love getting to not only, I don't only love reading for you guys and getting the messages to you, I love being in that space with you guys. And if you guys are a part of that stream, you know very well exactly what I'm talking about. We're figuring out Thursdays because my schedule has changed a little bit. So for right now, every other week, it'll be just Steven, just Ghost Dragon ZW, and I'm not sure what's going to go on in the in-between weeks. Every other Monday, so the Monday that you're watching this, right after at 12 p.m. noon Eastern, it's going to be myself and Ghost Dragon ZW with Afternoon Talk, where we kind of just hang out and chat. Other than that, I know I'm forgetting a million things, but reach out, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com, and read through the description box because there's extra additional stuff there too. Oh, I'm doing a new shorts video series called Am I the A-Hole? I see a whole bunch of other people just as not qualified to be doing it as I am, but I feel like you guys are always telling me that you trust me and trust my advice, not just from spirit and source, but my advice as your friend, as Gemma. So, and I've also gotten 4 or 5 emails of people asking me to do a short series on this. So that's what I'm doing. What it is, you send me a situation in your life where you feel like you are in the right, but someone else made you feel like an a-hole about it. And I will give you my God's honest opinion as to whether or not I think you are, in fact, the a-hole. Lots of fun stuff coming up. Please send those, I'm going to call it ADA, Am I the A-hole? Questions to GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. Don't forget, donations are what help keep the channel going, keep me able to buy equipment, backgrounds, decks. They help me live, okay? So if you're able to donate, please, please consider doing so. Again, I say, be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. You are amazing. You are capable. You are smart. You are not the sum of your biggest mistakes. You're not the sum of your worst fears. You are a co-creator of your universe with source, with spirit, with your team. Get out there and manifest the absolute best for yourself. And don't forget, you can literally speak things into existence. This is the type of stuff I will work on with you if you take my spirituality course. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, remember I believe in you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.